Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here at Wear Yellow Proudly. First of all, we'd like to wish all of you good health and safety. Secondly, we'd like to thank you so much for volunteering your time. We are linking all of your media in the description. To our audience and community, please consider supporting our panelists or the organizations they support. Lastly, we'd like to give a content warning to our audience. During this panel, we will be discussing racism, brutality, systemic violence, and other extremely difficult topics. We'll try to stop short of descriptions of the actual harm or murder, since I'm sure that that will be too difficult even for many of us to share or to hear. Which brings me to the stated goal of this panel: to foster meaningful discussion between Asian communities and Black communities about ways in which Asian communities can empower, support, and stand in solidarity with Black communities today, tomorrow, for the rest of our lives, and continuing past our lifetimes. Your personal advice, your professional advice, resources that we can discuss and link in the description, organizations to donate to, and more. We do not wish to in any way sweep under the rug or ignore the hundreds and thousands of years of horizontal racism, colorism, and discrimination that has gone on between our communities. Unfortunately, we don't have a historian here today who can discuss that. We are looking to interview a Black and Asian historian in the near future. It might be difficult for our Asian audience to hear about the anti-Blackness baked into Asian and particularly East Asian cultures. All of our Asian panelists are open to discussing these issues. Hopefully, we can use our knowledge of history and our own narratives to provide our audience with practical things they can do to contribute to Asian Black solidarity going forward. Of course, our main audience is Asian Pacific Islander people, but we'd love for non-Asian, non-Black people of color, as well as white people, to be able to learn from this panel as well. Okay, now let me give each of our panelists a brief introduction. Panelists, if you don't mind, after your intro, could you please unmute and share with us your general whereabouts in the world and how you and your loved ones are doing health and safety-wise? So, in alphabetical order, first we have Raehann Bryce-Davis. Hailed by the New York Times as a striking mezzo-soprano and by the San Francisco Chronicle for her electrifying sense of fearlessness, Raehann Bryce-Davis is an opera singer to watch. She is a frequent soloist on stages from New York's Carnegie Hall to Vienna's Musikverein to Italy's prestigious Teatro Massimo, and the winner of many international competitions across 5 continents. Welcome, Raehann.
Hi, so glad to be here and to explore these conversations with all of you. I'm currently in Texas, in a tiny town called Keene, Texas, about an hour from Dallas. My family's doing pretty well. We have 2 doctors in the family. I have a sister who's a doctor in New York. We've been very worried about her throughout this pandemic, but gratefully she hasn't gotten sick. She's okay. My dad also is a physician here in Texas, and wow. But he also has dodged the bullet and is still healthy and well, and my whole family is relatively well.
That's really great to hear, and thank them both for their incredible work, and especially considering the, I'm sure we'll talk about this today, considering the startlingly high rate at which Black Americans are affected by COVID-19. So really grateful. Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, next we have Tamar Greene. Tamar Greene is a versatile artist who has graced stages worldwide, showcasing his passion for theater, classical, reggae, hip-hop, R&B, blues, and jazz music. Tamar is currently playing the role of George Washington in the Broadway company of Hamilton. Welcome, Tamar.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion.
Our pleasure, truly.
Really, truly excited to speak with all of you about this. I'm doing well, very fortunately. I'm actually in eastern New Jersey, so just outside of the city. Just bought a house.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And everyone is, again, like doing well, very, happily. My sister is also in the medical field. My sister is an RN in New York City, in the Bronx. And she's frontline doing it at the hospital, and she's been through all of this. And fortunately staying very healthy. So yeah, so we're all doing well, and yeah, I'm excited for this conversation, y'all. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tamar. That's amazing. I do have to say that on our panel on Thursday, that we recorded on Thursday, 2 of our other Black panelists had family members who are in the healthcare industry. So we just want to make a really extra special acknowledgement of their contributions to the health and well-being of all Americans. It's just incredible. Okay, next we have Sam Lim. Sam Lim is an award-winning educator and activist with a background in LGBTQ plus advocacy, nonprofit leadership, and program management and facilitation. They currently serve as a diversity, equity, and inclusiveness facilitator with Teach for America and as the inaugural chair of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Atlanta Pride Committee Board of Directors. Welcome, Sam.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation today. I'm currently located in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'll be moving to Salem, Massachusetts in about a month, so that'll be exciting.
Oh, wow.
I'm doing well. I'm currently in Atlanta with my girlfriend. She's doing well, and I'm glad to say that my family in New York is also healthy and safe, so thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, and next we have Jessica McCallum. Originally from SoCal, Jessica is an engineer with an artistic bent living in the Bay Area. She identifies as Black and Asian, or mixed, depending on the occasion, and speaks fluent Indonesian. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I have never done a panel like this before, so I'm super excited and curious. I'm currently in South Bay, Sunnyvale in California, and I'm doing fine. I'm not affected as much by COVID and things like that. I can work from home. My parents are doing fine. They're in SoCal. Health-wise, they're doing fine. But I am worried about my dad, who is currently in between jobs and having a little bit of trouble trying to find a job during this time. So.
Best wishes to him.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And finally, we have Susan Zhang. Pianist Susan Zhang debuted with the Augusta Symphony Orchestra at age 12 and has concertized, won competitions, and recorded around the world since. She is also co-director of The Concert Truck, a mobile concert venue nonprofit organization dedicated to democratizing classical music. Welcome, Susan.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here today. I
you.
feel very honored to be among these very accomplished people. And I'm just really looking forward to learning from you all and to sharing. So I'm currently in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm doing fine. I'm living with my boyfriend. He's also fine health-wise. And my parents, who live in Augusta, Georgia, are fine health-wise right now. My father's recently retired, so he doesn't have much reason to leave the house. And my mother, Georgia opened up recently, so she is going back to work. She works at the medical college there, but she's primarily in research, so I don't think she's really quite as risk.
Less contact with patients.
Sure.
That's good. That's good. All right. So for all of our panelists, an introductory question to get discussion going. What are some actionable items our viewers, and particularly our Asian Pacific Islander viewers, can do right now to help support and empower the Black community?
I'll tell you what I myself have been doing the last week, and I think it's something that all of us need to be doing, whatever our backgrounds are. The last election was a bit difficult, and I lost some friends due to, I grew up in Texas, and, I've always been kind of the only Democrat amongst my friends, which has always been, something I, just accepted as part of the situation. But when the political situation turned, that it wasn't just talking about big government or small government, we were talking about incredibly human values, then I just felt like I couldn't have those people as part of my network, as part of my team and people that I valued and trusted. But lately, I've been faced with one of my very good friends is going to become a police officer. She's graduating from police academy in a couple months. And so I've felt like it's my responsibility to at least try to be a voice for reason, a voice for, you know, I almost take it personally that she's grown up with a best friend that's Black, and she doesn't understand what I'm going through with this political climate.
Is this a white woman?
She's Hispanic,
Oh,
actually,
okay,
but
interesting.
she's a staunch Trump supporter. And so I've lately taken it upon myself to start having these really difficult conversations, and they're frustrating and they're exhausting, but I think all of us have to take it upon ourselves to have, we have a sphere of influence that not everyone else has. And so we have to take the responsibility to confront racism when we see it, to speak up when we see injustice, no matter who it is that we're talking, that is in our sphere of influence. And so I think that's one of the first steps is first first you have to check in with yourself, read literature, try to understand diverse perspectives, you know, read Black authors, watch documentaries. That's the first place to start, with yourself. And then to work within your sphere of influence, to speak out when you see injustice, and to talk to your friends, and to together, all of us, try to create the climate that we want it to be, where everyone can feel included and safe, and, you know, with liberty and justice for all. That's the goal.
Absolutely. I do want to say something very briefly, and which is to thank you, and particularly to thank our Black panelists and all of our Black friends and colleagues and loved ones for speaking with white people and All Lives Matter people about what Black Lives Matter means, and because frankly, I don't think it's your job. It should not be your responsibility to tell people that your literal lives matter. And Raehann, you couldn't be more right. It is not political. Your lives are not political. I do think that it is our job. It is non-Black people's job to tell, you know, dissenters, people who are on the wrong side of history, that Black lives are not political. But those Black people who do take it upon themselves to do so, even though it is not your job, I personally, and we as a team really want to thank you for that. So any other panelists want to respond to Raehann or have an answer to the question? Or yeah, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about the election too, I think sometimes folks can get caught up on focusing on just that big election, right? Like we talk about the presidential election is the big one when it comes around. But I also want to note that we shouldn't underplay the importance of non-elected local leadership that is public and appointed, and also state races and non-presidential federal races. Specifically for me, I'm involved with DeKalb Young Democrats here in Georgia, but in my move to Salem, Massachusetts, I'll be joining the City of Salem's Cultural Council, part of the local city government. And that's an appointed position, and I'll be helping review disbursement for grants. So arts organizations and cultural foundations will be applying to grants. And that's an example where that's a position where in that role, I have a lot of say in what visibility we're seeing from communities, right? Because we know that historically, artists of color, queer artists have not been given the opportunities that they deserve or are proportionate. And when folks can step into local leadership that are boards, there's tons of them. There's tons of them where local elected leadership are actually struggling to find people to appoint to those positions. People can actually give a lot of influence into their local communities, because that's where a lot of the decision making is. That's really affecting people head on.
I wanted to add on that, yeah, checking in with yourself and reading um, Black literature is definitely one of the first steps, just as Raehann pointed out. And also, yeah, like it's not just about the big elections, it's about local elections. And I, there's Obama's essay that went around. I don't know if you guys all read it, but basically that, where it's like, let's take all of this and energy and put it into something meaningful at all levels. I agree with that. And then also to Rand's point of, talking to your sphere of influence, I think in addressing the Asian American audience, I know a lot of our parents came here to America as adults and they didn't get like US history courses. So just kind of explaining to parents and older generations who did not grow up in America, just kind of the history of Black people. Like I'm sure they don't know that. I mean, my mom like kind of knows that, but sometimes like she still has these preconceptions in her mind about what it means to be Black, even though her husband is Black. They're still ingrained, you know, biased opinions and thoughts. So unconscious bias. So.
Yeah, thank you. I think Susan was next. I just do want to also give advice to our Asian Pacific Islander audience that I know that the language can be confusing because all lives matter. Like, if you don't speak English, like that sounds like a great thing. Or if your native or your first language is not English, like it sounds great. Like all lives matter. It sounds so. Just the kind of subtleties in the context might be worth discussing with your parents or relatives. So, Susan.
Thanks. Oh, so I totally agree with everything that has been said. I wanted to dig in a little bit more into the self-examination and education that we've been talking about. So I can't really speak for all Asian American people. I can only really share my own experiences with racism and my own thoughts on and how I'm approaching this. So as far as self-examination goes, I think there's been a lot of for myself to recognize that even though I am a minority, I still have certain privileges in this country because of white adjacency and my model minority status, and how I'm seen as non-threatening or obedient in some ways. And so I have to be really honest with and critical of myself and my own internalized biases, just as you were saying, and a lot of my own blind spots with this. And I've also been thinking a lot about why it is that Asian Americans approach in this way, and that in this kind of complicity or assimilation to the order, and why we have a fear of speaking out. And sort of understanding that for myself, like as the daughter of immigrants, I think that I'm sure my parents had a lot of reason for me to teach me not to be so vocal about my opinions because of their own traumas that they experienced when they first came here. But it's also coming to understand that I have certain privileges that they don't have as well, because I grew up here, just like you're saying, I was educated here, and I speak English as a first language. So I do feel because of that I have more of a responsibility to do more. And I think also in self-examination, a part of that is listening and validating other people's experiences and kind of shutting up about my own and not making that the point, right? And so as far as education goes, Jess, you had mentioned US history, right? And I feel like in the past few weeks, I've learned more about Black history in this country than I did in my social studies classes. So I think that we are also in a place where we really need to teach ourselves, and understanding that my place here as an Asian American would not exist if the groundwork for civil rights had not been laid by the Black community. I totally agree. It's not Black people's job to teach us to do this. I think this is work that we need to do on our own, for sure. And a few action points. I think protesting. Obviously, I know that we're going to dig into that with the COVID pandemic that we're dealing with, but also donating to organizations that support racial justice causes, voting, like we said, supporting local Black businesses, and being aware of that. And I think something that we'll also dig into later, specific to our profession, but amplifying Black voices in whatever field that you're in, and making space for that is very, very important. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Thank you, Susan. So I do want to go to Tamar, because he's been listening with the most intent listening face I have ever seen. It is fabulous. I can see the thoughts, like screaming out of your brain.
It's because, well, one, I am happy to be amongst so many great people here and listening to all these different actions, not just talk, action that's happening here. It's exciting because, as a Black man, it is exhausting. It is just exhausting day to day. We had a Hamilton meeting. We have Hamilton meetings weekly. And a couple weeks ago, after one of the meetings, this was when basically we were coming to the industry and saying, why aren't you saying anything? Especially Hamilton, who employs all of us people of color, they weren't saying anything yet. And it was too long. It just was a little bit too long. And I love Hamilton very much. I love the company very much. I love the producers, one of the best producers I've worked for. But I was like, why are you, what's happening? Why haven't you said anything yet? And so a lot of us have talked and made it happen, basically. Made it happen. And we had an emergency meeting and where it's public now because he made the public statement. Him and Lin-Manuel both made statements about action and what is going to be the future. They have like a full fleshed out plan of hiring a consultants and working with the Ford Foundation and doing different big time things that will hopefully diversify and actually, in the best definition of the word, diversify the organization and Broadway from a whole, and something as big as Hamilton can be that. Now, I say it's tiring. It's tiring because these aren't new things. This is why I get frustrated when certain friends of mine are always like, what can I do? Oh my gosh, I'm so shocked this is happening. And I probably got 15 texts in like half a day last Monday, from all that. And it was exhausting because I'm like, Black Lives Matter isn't new. Black Lives Mattering isn't new. And like, how are you so surprised by something that keeps me up at night? It's been a thing for a long time. We've had all kinds of things, riots, all kind of stuff going on for many, many years. This shouldn't be a surprise. What I mean? It's like, you should be like feeling like, okay, wow, how could I say that to yourself? Like, how have I existed this long and not known that these issues were so grave? I'm not surprised. I'm tired. And so getting back to the meeting I had with Hamilton, one of my castmates, lovely castmates, she reached out to me afterwards. She's a non-Black or indigenous person of color. She reached me and said, when is the last time that you felt seen? And that was a different question. And I actually hadn't thought about that question at all. I hadn't thought about that. When's the last time I felt seen? And I almost started crying. Because I couldn't really attach a moment where I've actually accurately felt seen. And it took me a while. It's something I've been thinking about since she asked me that for a couple of weeks now. And I talked about it. And again, I was like teary-eyed last week or earlier this week in our conversation. Because I carry this weight as a Black man every day. I've had to put on masks in order to survive or to make my situation just more appeasing in order to just move on. It's happened in every circle. It's happened in undergrad, you know, where people were making fun of my accent or something like that. I don't think I have much of an accent, actually. You know, I was like, well, I don't understand why, but it was based off stereotypes and stuff. Someone drew a picture of me holding an axe and said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I'm like, this is my friend, you know, commenting on how Black people speak, apparently, right? But I don't even say ask. I'm sure, you know, some people do. Can I ask you something? Sure, yeah, people say that, but like I don't actually. So like I don't even know where that comes from. There's lots and lots of stuff that I didn't say anything in that moment.
Okay, I just have to jump in there because I don't know if you saw. I just
saw
had
it.
a
Yeah,
total
I'm looking at
freaking meltdown.
going through
So, AAVE, our African American Vernacular English, is a distinct and unique and beautiful dialect of American English. It is highly studied and respected, and I'm partially a linguist. Is part of my. I have never studied AAV, but I've studied a lot of other different languages and American dialects, and ACTS has a lot of linguistic and etymological precedent for its usage, and that's just totally horrific. And I did also want to speak to our audience who has texted a Black person. I'm so shocked. You know, how are you? You're not bad. I understand where you're coming from, but I would offer you, instead of asking them a question, say, let me know if I can do anything for you, period. Don't use a question mark, put a period, because what that does is it doesn't pressure them to respond. You don't know how emotionally traumatized they are. The chances are more than you are. So you can text them, I'm here for you. Let me know if you need anything. What I've been texting my friends is thank you for existing. But don't say, how are you? Unless you know that this is like your best friend in the world and you really want to know how they are, you know. But if it's a colleague or someone you're not super close to, text them, I hope you are well, not how are you? Or let me know if you need anything, or thank you for existing, etc. Don't put the onus on them to respond and tell you how they are, because they're not okay.
Absolutely. And I'm very, and this is not, again, bashing anyone who has reached out to me. Like you said, I love my friends. I love my friends very
much. They mean well. I mean,
and I know you mean well. Yeah, I know you mean well.
But it does speak to the privilege that they have. That the thought doesn't occur in their brain. Oh, it might be a little bit burdensome to ask a Black person how they are right now, because they're not okay.
Right.
I would add, in just asking a question or you know, making a statement, tell them what you're doing, because right now we're getting so much, like he's saying, all the text messages, and I'm so grateful. But the one that's meant the most to me was one of my friends that I grew up with, also here in Texas, and she was saying, well, she said, I'm so sorry you're going through this and that I haven't seen this before. I am reading this book. I just watched this documentary. I just donated to this foundation. And that to me says more than your words ever could. She's trying to change her thinking, her implicit bias, and she's trying to actively counter that. And I think that's the only thing that's meaningful in this time. Right now, it's pop culture to be like really hip and like to post like protest pictures and whatever. It doesn't matter if they're just words unless we're gonna do something. And it has to be lasting change. Not just pretty words are not gonna change anything. You have to do something.
I could not agree more. The posts that are like, especially like the hashtag Blackout Tuesday post where you just post a freaking black square, that's like 0.001%. Like you're not even halfway to step one. Like telling with words what actions you're going to do is like step 0.5. Enacting the first action is step one. So you're totally right, Raehann, and everyone else who's saying this. All of you companies, if you're watching this, show us.
Absolutely. And even with the Blackout Tuesday thing, because things get misconstrued and people pick up something quickly and then run and think they're doing something. And I applaud those who are trying. But the Blackout Tuesday was supposed to be a pause from continuing regular life as usual mentality. It wasn't meant to black out the message. If you were going to post something advertising your shoes you're selling or something, take a pause on that for this Tuesday and post about how you can be a better ally, how you can, what you're doing, like Raehann was saying, like what you are doing, the actionable things. I had a friend of mine who reached out to me, and he was one of the people in the beginning that kind of irked me just a little bit. He just happened to hit me at the wrong time. It was just like, how are you doing? What are you okay? That kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, fine, but he's a friend. But then he came back and said, like, I just wanted you to know that I am the chair of this particular community board, and we introduced a resolution tonight to defund the police department in this area. And it passed.
May I ask what area that was?
It is in District 5 in NYPD, so it's in New York.
Oh, fantastic. Wow, congratulations to your friend. That's amazing.
Which is amazing. And that message was very different than anything I've gotten, actually.
Wow, yeah, oh my gosh, I cannot even imagine.
Sure.
I would say to people, if you're gonna DM a Black friend something like that, like this is what I'm doing, don't expect them to say, oh my God, you're so great. Like, don't expect a response. Please don't expect praise. If you get a thank you, that's enough. Like, don't do it for show. Don't do it for your Instagram. Don't do it for a brand. Do it for your fucking self. Cool. Susan.
If I may say a word about allyship, and what I have discovered in my own experience with this, that I think I'm also noticing that there are a lot of people who are afraid to do something because they're afraid to do it wrong. And I myself have felt that. And I think there are a lot of musicians on this panel. I saw some meme about how it's like practicing, it's a skill. Allyship is an action and you get better at it. So it's better to try and start and do something wrong and then learn from that based on feedback, take your ego out of it, and just understand like, oh, okay, I can do this better, just like, when you're learning a new piece. So for myself, I feel like in the past few weeks even, I've grown a lot in learning from people and doing the wrong thing.
I do have a comment, but I'm wondering if I could bring it back to another point earlier in the conversation that Susan brought up around history curriculums. And we talk about how, and I was a history teacher for 2 years. I taught AP US history and world history. One, I can tell you for a fact, and I taught at a predominantly Black school. And I can tell you for a fact that the curriculum is not designed to properly educate and service Black students. And that goes back to this other discussion of, we have to recognize that when the American school system as it exists today was created, we were slave owners as a nation. So the system is not broken. The system was designed this way. We need to create an entirely new educational system to service all children. Part of the work that I do in the motto of Teach for America, one day all children in this nation will have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. That must include Black and brown children. End of story. And when the things I saw in the classroom, I had students, well, not just the classroom too, but in their own community. I had students that were walking in their own neighborhoods right outside the school who were got the police called on them by white people who had moved into the neighborhood. And it was local police that took care of that and ended up arresting the children. They are children for absolutely no reason.
Other than being Black and brown.
Yes, in a neighborhood that gentrification was becoming a part of. And in addition to that, inside the school building where I taught, multiple occasions in which youth in that school were accused of doing or committing a crime. They were accused of it, and there was no evidence found at this point. It was just an accusation. And the police come into the building and arrest the students in front of all of the other students. The amount of trauma that causes for Black and brown students to see their peers and have themselves arrested inside a school building. We are supposed to be the safety for students. Why are we arresting children? Are you that afraid of Black children? We have to address anti-Blackness in schools, and the system, this, as you can tell, it's an emotional topic for me, but the system is not designed to service all children, and we need a new system. And it also irks me that, like, you can look at the school I taught at, where we basically didn't really have enough supplies in the bathroom. It was a coin flip whether there was soap in the bathroom. It was a coin flip whether you would walk into a teacher's classroom and there would be enough textbooks for a child. We didn't have a library. We could not receive funding from the county to get a library. And then you go up a little bit north, where it's predominantly white communities, and there's the most beautiful auditoriums, technology centers,
What
and
city
labs
was this,
that
Sam?
you can imagine. Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Atlanta, Georgia. So these are the experiences that are happening in public schools. And we as a nation, but especially non-Black educators that are in schools, need to speak up. If you haven't been speaking up, now is the time to.
Better late than never. For our Black panelists, just to follow up on Sam's commentary, do you have an opinion on Black History Month, whether it very necessarily highlights the contributions of Black Americans that are far too often overlooked, or does it enable schools to relegate Black history to only 1 month and talk only about white history for the other however many months they're in school, or both, you know? For Raehann and Jessica and Tamar.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, did I open a huge can of worms?
He did. We were both looking at each other like, who's jumping in? That's a great question. It's I think it is a dance, right? You can't take away. Man, it's a tough question. It's really a heavy question. It's deep, but I would say it is a dance. You need both, because the reason why it was started, it's like I think of, like, people talk about this as far as fraternities and stuff, and why there's Black fraternities and that's racist and stuff like that, sororities and all that. It's because look at the history, look back at the reason why. The reason why Black History Month is a thing is because Black history is not talked about throughout the year. So we had to take some time, which happens to be the shortest month of the year, to talk about Black history a little bit. And they still don't go in as much as they should, I know, in the school systems, but it is absolutely a necessity. And they're pulling away from the rest of the year. That is now another issue on its own. I mean, like, the history in this country is so deep, and it's so interesting when I hear people mention, like, you know, the All Lives Matter and all these other things, and slavery was so long ago and yada yada yada. Like, my dad's grandfather was a slave, you know, like, it's not that long ago. It's not that long ago. Like, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were murdered, like, in my dad's lifetime. Like, this is not, what are we talking about? Things they're still happening today. I think of, like, this president who was going to have his rally in Tulsa on I'm sorry, I'm just like, I've got so much I just want to, like, throw. I'm just like, I'm bottled up energy right now. Tulsa Massacre, if you don't know, the Tulsa Massacre, the Black Wall Street, has been called the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. And that is where he was going to pick up his rally on Juneteenth. Yes, Alice said on Juneteenth. And Juneteenth, if people don't realize, is our Independence Day. It is the day we weren't freed on July 4th. That wasn't for us. Juneteenth was the last day that those last slaves were let known that they were free. And look at this. Look, even step back, right? We have, as people of color, Black people, we have our own Independence Day in this here United States. We also have our own national anthem, like "Lift Every Voice and Sing" is ours, because the one that we use has racist text in it. The systemic issues in this country are so deep, and it's angering that they're not discussed all year long, because there's so much going on that they were talking about removing even slavery from history books, and talking about even the indigenous people here, and like, oh, Columbus came here and they shared, turkey, and they had a great time, and then the Native Americans gave them.
Oh gosh.
No, there were literally school districts that were trying to remove all that from the books, and like, no, you can't do that. You just can't, because it explains where we are today. Yes, my white friends who are friends of mine now, yes, you have not personally owned slaves. I understand that. But until I don't have to deal with the reactions of your ancestors, then we will still keep talking about this, because it has to be done. We are fighting against a poison that has been allowed to permeate since we were brought to this country. And it is still a thing today, systemically.
Absolutely. I don't want to take up too much time, because I do want to get to individual questions, but I do want to go to Raehann and Jessica about if you want to comment on Black History Month or other educational issues. You don't have to, but if you want to.
I think Tamar hit a lot of nails on the head. I would point to even in the churches, there's a quote that says that Sunday morning is the most segregated hour. I think Sunday at 11 is the most segregated hour in America. And in my own church, there are literally two different conferences. There's the regular conference and there's a Black conference. And those came up because Black people were not allowed to have positions of leadership. And so therefore they were like, well, then we're going to start our own. And now there's I'm not hitting Black History Month exactly right now, but these are just the remnants that are left from a broken system, or what is a successful system, as Sam said, successfully accomplished what they were trying to accomplish. The remnants of all of that are clearly with us today, even if somebody says, I am not a racist. The system still exists.
If someone says I'm not a racist, they're probably a racist. Sorry, not sorry.
I love the definition in White Fragility that talks about how if you use the definition of being a racist as being like somebody who actively tries to harm somebody of another race, that's not necessarily what it is. I wish I had the quote in front of me right now. I might somewhere.
I'm not sure the exact quote that you're referring to, but I do know the chart of white supremacy, the pyramid of white supremacy, which has a line for covert and overt white supremacy, which is, at the top is like lynching and ethnic cleansing. Like, okay, we get that, sure. But there's so many smaller things down the level that people don't even know is racist, and a lot of people who are actually like more toward the covert side of racism get so offended when they're called racist. If a Black person would ever just say, hey, like that thing that you said or what it was a little racist, I'd be like, okay, I won't do that, and I won't do that anymore, and thank you for telling me that was a racist thing that I did. That's it. It's not the hardest thing in the world. Also, I had one response to Tamar, which was you said your great grandfather was a slave. I posted I made a graphic a few days ago where I did some math, and so in 1526, the first person of African descent the first people of African descent were enslaved in the continental United States. That was 494 years ago, and 494 years from now is 2514. So if you want to say, oh, slavery was a long time ago, just maybe wait another 494 years and then you can talk.
Okay, sorry, I found her quote. So she says, racism is what happens when you back one group's racial bias with legal authority and institutional control. When you back one group's collective bias with that kind of power, it is transformed into a far-reaching system. Then she goes on to say, racism is the foundation of the society we are in, and to simply carry on with absolutely no active interruption of that system is to be complicit with it. And she says, nice white people who really aren't doing anything other than being nice people are racist. And that kind of just of sums it up. And it, going back to your issue of Black History Month, you have to take active steps towards educating yourself and towards trying to counter this system that exists. And so, yes, we need Black History Month. Yes, and for the rest of the year, we need to actively try to counter this system that we're all living in.
Yes, and the improv principle that can apply to almost anything in life. Actually, I was going to start with Susan's individual question, but actually, since we're on you, and this is a perfect seg to your personal question, because I actually got, I think I told the team this, I got a fundraising call from the Metropolitan Opera a few days ago from a white woman asking for donations, and I said, I've have a lot of colleagues who've worked at the Met. I support the Met, but I unfortunately will not be giving you any more money until the Met makes a public statement about Anna Netrebko performing in blackface in Aida last year. And she started to say, it's her way of acting and getting into the character. And I was like, no. So, Raehann, for you, it's no secret that the opera industry has a centuries-long history of blackface, yellowface, brownface, redface, and countless other horrifically offensive racist practices. In fact, the two most common examples involve the two communities that we're discussing today, Madame Butterfly and Aida, the latter of which was performed on a major American stage as recently as 11 months ago. Could you speak to these experiences or ways that Asian people can help empower and amplify Black voices literally and figuratively in the opera world?
So, as you said, there are a lot of problems in terms of racial equity in opera. The blackface is kind of the easiest one to pin your finger on. As you were saying, Madame Butterfly, it's a piece that is set in Japan, and very often it is, performed by a predominantly white cast going, doing all of the very, very, very stereotypical.
Yep. As directed by a white director most often also.
Right, very right. And so the question that I've always posed to people is, why can't we just hire Asian singers?
You can.
Right, you can. And the question that the reaction that I always receive is, first of all, in opera, it's a highly specialized field, and there are not a lot of people in the world that can sing some roles well, right? And so that's their excuse. They couldn't find somebody that could sing this role well that was specifically that race. And so my question to the industry is, so then develop them, And this is one of the problems that is the biggest. Blackface is it's just like a little cherry. It's a terrible thing, but it's not my biggest concern. Like, don't do it, but hire Black people. That's my concern. Then we don't even have to deal with that issue. If you deal with the root cause and develop Black talent.
Sure, having a white singer sing Aida not in blackface is definitely better than having a white singer sing Aida in blackface. I don't think anyone.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but you could also hire a Black singer.
Correct. And there's so many problems all throughout the creation. It takes a lot of money to create an opera singer. From the beginning, you have to have voice lessons. You know, in New York, there are a lot of teachers charging $200 an hour. If you want to go to an audition somewhere in the country and you don't live in New York, you need to pay, you know, a $350 airline ticket. You need to have somewhere to stay. If you don't know anybody there, you need to pay a hotel that's going to be $200 a night. You need to get to your audition. I went to Manhattan School of Music. They tell you, don't take the subway. It could affect your throat. You need to take cab. You know, and all of these things are just dollar signs that could prevent the creation of a singer that could play these roles, these hard to cast roles. And if we're losing so many singers along the way from lack of funds, from, you know, also sometimes voices, especially bigger voices, which both of those roles are in Butterfly and Aida, they take someone who knows how those voices work to be able to develop them into the masterpieces that they deserve to be.
As well as Otello is the other role that we have been discussing.
Right. I was just watching a panel with Russell Thomas, who is a Black dramatic tenor, and therefore, you know, who is ideal to play Otello. It's extremely rare voice to cast. And so therefore, as an industry, we have to actively counter the situation that we have. And I mean, I don't know. It's a tough situation, because currently, I don't know, maybe we need to start a competition, a butterfly competition.
Sure.
And every dramatic age, you know, there's just a jump. There's a gap between the talent, because there is the talent that is already there and is already developed, but maybe they didn't get the agent will be able to bridge the gap towards the industry. You know, it's
Tamar, so Helen says that she would like to hear your opinion on this too, because you're also involved in the opera industry. I did want to say something that I said on the Thursday panel, which is that in a small regional theater at, like, you know, Wyoming something, you know, country opera or whatever, I can understand if you have a white person playing Cho-Cho-San or Aida not in blackface. But at A budget houses and at the Metropolitan Opera, which has the largest nonprofit budget in the entire world, there's no excuse. There's just not. So, Tamar, did you want to respond?
I mean, I wanted to concur. I mean, Otello is my actual dream role.
Oh gosh.
Like actually, because you said that and I was like, yes.
Can you call Lin-Manuel and ask him to do a, like, I don't know, Tello?
Just get it. Just do it.
I am certain that this entire Wear Yellow Proudly team would pay so much freaking money to hear you sing Otello, like, adapted by Lin-Manuel Miranda.
That would be funky, I'm sure. I'll text him.
Right.
No, I just think of when I was studying that in school, I don't know if anyone knows. I got my master's in opera, vocal performance at Eastman. And there was first regarding Othello, I remember studying the role, and I love John Vickers. I just very much do. But if you're an opera singer, you know that he has done Othello, and he's done it in blackface and like big afro wig as well. And it's like, what the hell is going on here? It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing right now? Because there are, and I didn't know when I was younger. I didn't really, not even just like younger, when I was in school, I didn't even know that there were lots of people of color in the opera community. I had no idea. I was going and I was doing what my passion was. I'm a classical pianist first, so I love classical piano and classical music in general. And then I started singing much more and more. And then I had a teacher who just guided me into classical music and opera, and I fell in love with it. And as I was falling in love with it, I'm also a first generation American. So like my family's Jamaican.
Oh, wow.
And so a lot of my Jamaican family don't know anything about.
Oh, Raehann, are you also Jamaican?
I was going to say, you
Oh,
Jamaican?
that's fabulous. Wow.
No, what are the odds? I love that. So a lot of my family don't really know anything about opera, but my dad loves classical music. So he was, he's supporting and all that. But my little brother, I remember like my first week at Eastman, he asked me like, do Black people do opera? Like he asked me that. And I and at first I was like, what? Of course, Black people could do anything. What do you, but I didn't have an answer for him of a person, specifically.
Did you guys see what, I think it was last year, maybe 2018, when Marian Anderson was being considered to be on the $20 bill? Like, I literally could not think of a better person. Promise. So Tamar, since we're on casting, opera, theater, and since you have such a platform and such a specific background, I want to talk about Hamilton, because the show is, I don't know, if you've been living under a rock somehow and you don't know that Hamilton is famous for portraying all these white people from history with actors of color, now you know. Last year, the first Asian person played Hamilton, Filipino-Japanese-American actor Mark Dela Cruz. Yet the Instagram account at Broadway is Racist, that publishes anonymous stories of racism in the industry, has almost 3,000 followers, and now has inspired at Opera is Racist with almost 7,000 followers. Do you have any experience in Hamilton or the theater industry as a whole, or not the opera industry, or really performing arts in general, demonstrating relationships between Black and Asian communities, or ways in which Asian people can support and empower Black actors and other theater professionals?
I just wanted to show that picture.
Oh, nice. Is that Mark?
That's Mark.
Oh my gosh, that's fabulous.
He is an excellent Hamilton person, human. Also Eddie Lee, who's another Asian American, also played Hamilton on Broadway. And I just share that because I thought it was my first time.
And here's where our audience just like fan person, I don't want to say fan girls, just like fans out and be like, oh my God, Hamilton, because that's what I'm doing. But,
yeah, I will say that we're in a, we have to all support each other. We all have to support each other. We've been talking a lot about, this is about Black Lives Mattering right now, but I was certainly there. I know when Helen was doing her series of, I can't remember what she called it exactly, but the series of basically spreading education on Asian music and awareness and stuff. And I thought that was extremely beautiful. She sang, I think it was a traditional song. I was unfamiliar with the song, but my girlfriend, who was Black, she came in the room and started singing the song in Mandarin, I believe it was. And I was like, okay, all right. And I was like, I didn't know. Apparently she sung it in school, but it's like, I was like, oh, this is beautiful. This is awesome. I've always wanted to learn more and more about that music, classical, Asian music as well, just in general. But I think we all can just support each other. And doing the show on stage with an Asian American, Hamilton, was a special experience I cannot even explain, really. Like it was like a moment where I was feeling like, oh, this is very similar to how I felt my first time as a Black man playing a white guy. I'm seeing this Asian American, I'm seeing young Asian kids in the audience, and we had a chance to meet afterwards, come on stage, and I'm seeing that reaction with this young Asian American boy, and this kid made a sign, and had in the audience during bows, and I went to go grab his hand, and we're doing a bow, and I saw the sign, and I just started dying laughing.
Oh my gosh.
Like with the final bow, and I'm just like looking at him, and I'm like, this is beautiful. This is what it's about, and this is why it's important.
Goddamn, that's
it was really, really special. And
fuck me.
That's why we need diversity. All of us need diversity. There's not enough Asian leads in this industry either.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Talk about it. We could have a whole panel on that. We might.
You
I
know,
don't know.
yeah, we can have a whole panel on that too. But we have to support each other. But if we can understand that how similar we are, then we can make
Yeah.
the change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tamar. I do want to go to Susan next for your question, I promised. And I really do think it's amazing that we have Jessica and Sam, because you're are adjacent to performing arts, because you're in our community and things like that. But I think it's really cool that we don't have specifically performers here, or have specifically non-performers here. And I'll definitely wrap you in on the COVID question. All right, Susan, so since we're talking about performing arts and our specific industries, I first want to shout out your organization, Concert Truck, for live streaming a free concert for patients, doctors, and nurses at my school, University of Maryland. I'm not sure if it's at this exact same campus, but we'll link it in the description. I loved your statement on your website that Concert Truck was created to democratize classical music. I think it'll be old news to most of our audience that anti-Black, Brown, Indigenous sentiments are pretty intertwined with classical music. Could you speak to your experience with this and how you're trying to undo those sentiments?
So to be perfectly honest, I had a lot of trouble kind of organizing my thoughts, because I have so many thoughts on this. And but before we dig in, I just wanted to address the assumption in our field of whether or not classical music is racist. And in a lot of conversations that I've been having with my colleagues, there's a wide variety of opinions on this. So even within our field, there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up, I guess, that you could say. So I think for this industry, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of things like, MSM was saying that they wanted to incorporate pieces by Black composers in their season this year. And I think, like that's a great first step and all, but I think I have a suspicion that a lot of these things are performative or cosmetic, and that to make real change in classical music, it all kind of boils down to education, I think. And so a couple of things can be addressed in education. First, I think, we've inherited a Eurocentric art form, essentially. And there's been a lot of Black erasure in the same way that there has been a lot of Black erasure in US history that we talked about earlier. So kind of rethinking the way that content is taught. But then to Raeann's point of providing resources, it does take a lot of money to create a classical musician, like a lot of money. And I think that there can be a bigger push to providing resources to Black students who want to pursue this professionally. So I think, again, addressing this idea of this debate of whether or not there's racism in classical music or whatnot, I know that it might seem to like non-classical musicians like that seems ridiculous because this is a Eurocentric art form, but again, in the conversations that I've been having, like a lot of people are on the fence about whether or not it exists or whether they see it, but just like a quick stat, in 2014, the League of American Orchestras had 1.8% of orchestral members were Black and 85.1% were white. So, and also based on my sort of the stories that I've heard from my Black colleagues, and as well as a lot of the Black musicians who have shared their stories publicly recently on live streams, they were at some point in their education made to feel like they weren't supposed to be there. And this is also, Tamar, when you said, like, do Black people sing opera? I think that there's this perception that that this is not your space, right? And that really needs to be changed as well in the education. And along with that, I think as we are establishing the canon of classical music moving forward, I think, you know, we do, as classical musicians, have this sort of obsession with the past and preserving sort of past works authentically. And unfortunately, I think you can't really divorce that from the context. And I think that we should reckon with the context under which these pieces were written, knowing that there were many, many voices that could have been that were, but because of the situation, they were not heard. And so moving forward, I think because we are in a place of history where things are more globalized, and we need to make a better effort to including unheard voices in the canon from now on. And the last thing I think for like industry changes, well, not the last thing, but another thing that needs to happen is we need to look at the people who are in charge of classical music, and I'm talking specifically about donors and boards, the people who are really making the decisions. Because, I mean, you can want Black people on stage in these performances all you want, but the boards, in the end of the day, are going to make those decisions. So if we can have more diverse boards, essentially, and not just like one or two people, but like really a board that is representative of the community which that institution serves, I think that there's going to be a lot more long-standing change eventually. So for myself as an artist, I've really reckoned with this for a very long time, for several years, and this is part of why Concert Truck was born, because we knew that there's this huge gap, and we wanted to do something to address it. So we want to essentially take the separation between our performances, like the official ones that happen in the halls, and what we consider outreach. I don't really like that term, but sort of the performances, community performances, we kind of want to bulldoze the separation between that, because we think that all performances we should consider how we are participating in the community for anything that we put out there. And what we put out there should really reflect our communities. And so we honestly, it's been a huge learning curve. We're still not getting it right, and but we're working on it. And just an example of some of these like very internalized biases at the very beginning. We were really aware of how a lot of outreach programs tend to feel a bit colonial, like we have this great art and we are giving it to you, like this kind of white saviory feeling. And so even with this knowledge, looking back at the way that we were pitching the project or explaining the project to people, we were still using some very like proselytizing language. And that we've had to like actively work against all of these biases to try to create a message that again will serve the community well. So and a solution that we have come to, I think works quite well, is that we try to partner with our community leaders and kind of let them take the lead and be very clear about what they're trying to accomplish with their community, because they know their communities better than we do. And then we program towards that. And I think that there's a lot of pushback sometimes from soloists kind of in our industry for that, because they feel like, oh, artistic integrity, and like we want to play what we want to play, what feels true to us. But I think that you can still do that and be mindful of your audience and think about the end goal. Like, what do you want your audience to feel at the end of this concert? And so that's sort of the approach that we try to take. So a few other notes on that. As a musician myself, I like I said before, I believe in giving voice to people of color, people who have been marginalized. And as someone who can curate my own stage, I want the repertoire that I play and the colleagues that I work with to be representative of the community at large. As a pedagogue, I am teaching myself more about the history of whitewashing in our industry. and discovering Black composers, learning their works, performing their works. I just did one yesterday, actually, at a veteran's home. I performed a work by William Grant Still. And then taking that research that I'm doing and giving it to the kids that I teach, my students, and allowing them to form a bond with these works that they might form with Mozart. And then they can, at least they have a choice, right? They've heard the music, they've studied the music. If they like it, they can continue performing it. If they don't have to, but it is part of the canon, right? I guess my last point is I've had to decide for myself, and this might seem very obvious to most people, but to really just state that I think we need to be humans first, basically. Humans first, musicians second. And if there's a part of my musical life that is harming another group of people, like, we need to investigate that and reckon with that and change our behavior. And so a lot of these sort of institutionalized practices, I think, need to reflect those human changes that we want to make.
I have no comment. That was all amazing. We probably won't edit a second of that. We'll just we'll just do a whole timestamp of Susan preaches that tells the gospel truth. Yeah. I do want to, I'm going to go to Jessica next. I do want to offer one little statistic that I quoted in our previous interview from, let's see, League of American Orchestras 2016. They surveyed budget groups 1 through 8, every major American orchestra. African-American representation was 2.5% in budget groups 4 through 8, that's smaller orchestras, and 1.2% in groups 1 through 3, which is, large orchestras. Asian Pacific Islander representation was 8.8% in groups 4 through 8, and 9.3%. It's higher in budget 1 through 3 orchestras for Asians, as opposed to lower for Black musicians. Just thought that was really curious. So Jessica, I would like to go to you because we've been talking about performing arts industries, and you are a mechanical engineer. Can you talk about how much, because most of us, I mean, all of our team probably won't have this knowledge, what kind of conversations are going on in your field about diversity and inclusivity and BIPOC representation? Have you experienced discrimination? Have you experienced any kind of workplace harassment, or in your personal life as a person of Black and Asian descent, what kind of gatekeeping have you been met with, or discrimination from within the community, et cetera, et cetera? So however much you want to share, please go ahead.
Big question. It's like basically my life story. I don't know.
Sure.
But I guess I'll start with like high school stuff. And I think this will ping some of Alice's memory, but I mean, it took a lot to get to where I am today. And a lot of it has to do with accessibility. So having extracurricular activities accessible and stable. So like I leaned on a lot of my friends and friends' parents for rides to go to track practice and speech and debate, and also just, I had to be academic on top of that. And I'm saying all of this because those are the things that are needed for a person of color to get to the top of their field, at least in academia or engineering or STEM. And I guess some criticism I got in my college application process was that I wasn't Black enough, or I was pulling the Black card. And
fuck
this
that.
is understandable because I applied to Stanford University and got in, and a lot of people felt I had taken their spot because I had pulled the Black card. And for every person who criticized me, there were 5 more who were obviously happy for me. but it was still felt bad that like people thought that, you know, I had the track record to get there. Like I got there and I graduated and I'm now a mechanical engineer, you know, making cameras for surgical robots in Silicon Valley.
That's so cool. Oh my gosh. That is so cool.
I just wanted to say that piece because, you know, that is missing from, that's what's missing for people of color to get to this spot. And I look around and there aren't that many Black women engineers that I work with. In my graduating class, there were a handful of other Black female engineers in mechanical engineering. I graduated in biomechanical engineering, but it was still under the same department. So, I mean, you look around and, you know, I'm in like, there's like a women's group in my company and also a diversity and inclusion group in my company that I've been a part of, which is really great.
Wow, that's good to hear.
Basically, in all of those circles, what's missing is the pool of candidates of people of color to hire. Like they want to hire like more women, more people of color, more talent, diverse talent, but it's just not there. And yeah, I feel like accessibility and stability in like K through 12 education is what really needs to be, you know, available. And as people have pointed out, like, you know, public schools need to be funded for all communities, you know, things like that, like basic things like that that's what keeps people from getting to like having success stories or just being, you know, making it in life, like having a life that they don't have to constantly worry about. And I also acknowledge that like I had opportunities, like I was lucky that I went to the school that I went to, like, and Alice can speak to this, like we had access to AP classes and I don't know, like we had good teachers, a number of people from our school like went to like higher education, like elite colleges, like that is a privilege. And we were there and I got to, you know, get to where I am today because of that. That's my piece.
It seems like such a strange thing to say, like public education should be funded for all students of all races and ethnicities, but somehow it's still a controversial statement. I just a quick follow-up. Have you been told you're not Black enough by Black people or white people or other non-Black people of color? Like what? Or have you been told you're not Asian enough by Asian people or by white people, you know?
Oh yeah, I guess I can speak a little bit about that too. Yeah, so my mom is Chinese Indonesian, so she's ethnically Chinese, but was born and raised in Indonesia, which is why I speak Indonesian. My dad's Black, and that I basically look like both of them combined. And in almost every situation in life, I have to kind of adjust or like, yeah, adjust my identity. So there's the census stuff like Mark 1 or more. I am like, I guess I'm Black if I only mark 1 because most people perceive me as Black. And I mainly get criticisms for not being Black enough from people who are not Black. And in Asian
Their
community,
job.
It's touching on what Tamar kind of said about like how I speak. It's that I don't have that dialect. I have the academic dialect, I think. I don't know, Jesse, if you know what I'm, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
But I don't
like
sound
super standard, like American Mid-Atlantic or whatever the hell that means.
Yeah. And I don't know, like traveling abroad or just being in spaces that are like, yeah, like in Asian communities, I guess. People just see that I'm Black. Like they can't tell. Like normally people are like surprised and they hear that I'm half Asian. Most people are surprised, but I guess in some Black communities, I don't really get that criticism. I definitely get looks because I look a little bit ethnically ambiguous depending on how I dress or have my hair. But yeah, it's weird. So it's the crux of my, this is the crux of my identity. Like I am both, and like I can't like not deny, I can't deny either side. So it's like I just have to roll with it in various situations.
Yeah. I will speak to any Asian person telling you you're not Asian enough and say, that ain't your business. And I'll also speak to all white people who are saying to you, you're not anything enough, and say you can go fuck yourself. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say that I do live in the Bay Area, which is in California, which is pretty progressive. So I haven't encountered any like violent things due to race or anything. Just, you know, those awkward ethnicity, where are you questions, things like that. And then also
Covert racism, not overt racism.
Yeah, and then also
Bill
just
racism.
that my name does sound white, so Jessica McCallum. So, you know, most people, you know, just, you know, okay, like I do sound white, I guess, sound white. So in terms of applying for jobs and things like that, people are sometimes surprised when they see me, but not anything bad in engineering or things like that. So I just wanted to say that.
No, please, thank you. To just get kind of one other angle of intersectionality, we have performing arts or different industries, we have biracialness, and then we have the LGBTQ plus community, which is super important to us here at Wear Yellow Proudly, as well as especially now during Pride Month. So Sam, you are an LGBTQ activist and educator, member of the community yourself. Do you have any advice for specifically our LGBTQ plus audience, and particularly our Asian Pacific Islander LGBTQ plus audience, on ways we can empower Black voices and support Black Lives Matter right now?
Absolutely. Before I get to that, I do just want to thank our two opera singers on the line. I studied with Alice to be an opera singer. I never made it past junior year, but I grew up in that area. I studied with Vincent Cole. So thank you for continuing that tradition and adding voice to the field. I know for me, like, I left the field primarily because I wasn't receiving enough supports. Vincent was amazing, but like outside of that, and I remember being at a young artist program, and one of the directors in the elevator said to me, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm, New York." And I was like, "No, but like, where are you born
really
at? What
from?
country from?"
Where
And
are
I
you
was like,
really from?
"I'm out."
No.
But thank you for what y'all are doing. To talk about LGBTQ work, we really, as a community, as an LGBTQ plus community, we need to do some self-reflecting. And that needs to come from a very deep place that is both theoretical, historical, and self-critical. And where I sort of start with this is we just need to recognize colonialism, like pre-colonialism, especially in indigenous communities in North America, in the aspect of gender identity, was very fluid. There were many what we now consider to be trans people, or like myself, gender non-binary folks, before that language was adopted and fluid. And as a result of colonialism, the expression of gender and self is policed. And we've created this false binary of male and female. And then when we talk about the very diverse LGBTQ plus community, we also need to recognize that in addition to that, because of colonialism as well, we have to recognize the regulation of Black bodies and Black emotions. And that sits very uncomfortably with a lot of people, solely because it's a very like human concept. We look at, for the criminalization of Black girls in schools. Why is it that young Black teenage girls have the highest percentage of write-ups for dress code infractions, for behavioral issues, when we know that white peers and other peers of color are dressing the same and performing the same in their lives and are not being treated the same? And it's a result of this regulation of Black dreams, Black bodies, and Black existence. And, you know, tying in George Floyd as an example, like this idea, I mean, even pre-George Floyd, but I can't breathe, right? In the white imagination, and in that instance, it was acceptable in the white imagination for a white police officer to put his leg and knee onto his neck and to end a Black life. So we need to recognize the regulation and lack of existence and recognition of Black excellence in white dreams, in white thinking. And that comes across many different identities. And when you say that to people, they're like, that's a lot to take in. But at the same time, you have to say, those are all biases that we hold. Those are all regulations that we hold as a result of our colonial society. And then when you compound all of that too, you're thinking, okay, we talked about the policing of expression of identity in gender. We talk about the regulation and criminalization of Black bodies. And now within the LGBTQ plus community, naturally this leads us to the discussion around Black trans bodies, Black trans individuals. And people are not connecting the dots. We say Black Lives Matter across all communities, folks saying Black Lives Matter, but are they really meaning Black Lives Matter? Are they saying that all Black lives matter? Are you just selecting which Black lives, or are you truly saying all Black lives matter? And we're seeing especially trans Black women being murdered, and people are not talking about it. We are seeing trans Black men being murdered, and we are not talking about it.
I just want to add that I have a good friend. I used to live in Cincinnati. I have a good friend named Ariel Shaw, whose sister, my friend Ariel Shaw is a Black trans woman, and she has a sister who is also a Black trans woman who was murdered yesterday, Raya Milton, in Butler County, Ohio, which was near Cincinnati, where I was from. So we would like to acknowledge and tell Raya to rest in power and give Ariel all of our thoughts. So, sorry, Sam, go ahead.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
And then you get into the space of, okay, how are we socially interacting within the LGBTQ plus community? Both from a trans lens and the lens and the non-trans lens. We know that Black bodies, both in the queer community and the non-queer community, are fetishized. And this is especially true in dating experiences of queer people. And I think people are just like not recognizing how much marginalization that the own biases that are at the core of a lot of historical work in white-centered LGBTQ organizations that are getting the most traction in society at this time, how much of an effect that is. And that's why I like to highlight the need for community building in LGBTQ spaces, especially for Black queer people of color. It comes to mind organizations like Southern Fried Queer Pride. They do a lot of like skill building sessions, arts sessions, family meal sessions to create and build community. I heard somebody say the other day when we were recognizing the Pulse nightclub shooting, they had said something along the lines of, it was that moment at Pulse that took away safety from the LGBTQ plus community. And I really was like, what are you talking about? There was no sense of safety before that. Trump just took away healthcare protections for trans people of color. And when we think
that,
yeah, and when we think about like, what does that mean on a deeper level though? Because we know that before the LGBTQ identity, we know that Black communities, Black people have the least amount of access to healthcare coverage already. They're most likely to be in food deserts where at my school, you couldn't find a proper grocery for up to an hour's drive. And
holy shit.
Then you add in compounding what's impacting with the intersectionality of Black identity and trans identity. And these are just things in the queer community that I'm really challenging my quote unquote white-centered pride organizations to open their eyes to and to consider. Do I think that every executive director of a pride organization needs to be white or needs to be Black? No, that's not like a feasible action given just the number of pride organizations and the number of spaces that they exist in. But you need leaders, like we mentioned, on your boards and executive directors who are conscious of these things. How are you building community and serving community? And that sort of brings me to my last point about boards and leadership in queer spaces, is oftentimes when we're talking about issues that are serving specific communities, and in this case, the Black communities in our country, because there is no, the Black community is not a monolith. We have to recognize that. And a lot of times in nonprofit orgs, when we talk about diversity, inclusion, leadership, it's a lot of times it's centered like, here's the solution, this is how we're gonna help our Black members, and like, this is what they're gonna love to do. And no, like, you do not have the answers. You have to go and listen to the folks in your community, to your Black members. And the point about boards, yes, we need to diversify boards. We need to create supports and trainings to help people of color, specifically Black people, to get them into the spaces where they're being seen, their voices are heard, and that they're getting the proper training for boards. But at the same time, as nonprofit leaders, we have to ask ourselves, yes, I could bring on a Black board member. Yes, I could bring on a Black trans board member. But have I already created the space where it's going to be safe for them in my organization? Because if you bring on a Black trans board member and your board is transphobic and racist, that is causing more trauma than you started out with. And this is, like I said earlier, this is a lot for people to grapple with. But we, especially as an Asian American community, have to come to terms with the amount of anti-Blackness that has existed, especially in multi-arts media, Asian multi-arts media. And I think that is a heavy conversation, and it takes time. And like, it took time for me to even just like go over those points. But it can't happen from one conversation with your nonprofit, with your queer org, with your board. It has to be over time. It has to be legitimately creating that community, or else none of it is significant. And we can't be speaking over Black voices. We can't speak for them. We have to speak with them.
Sam, I think we're gonna do like we did with Susan. We're just gonna run your whole thing as no edits. Just so for our panel, the second kind of general area that we would like to discuss is the intersectionality between Black communities and Asian communities and our solidarity. So according to the Centers for Disease Control, Black Americans are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. And Asian people are being targeted en masse as carriers of the Chinese virus, both of which expose systemic, long-standing racism in this country. How can Black and Asian people fight together against discrimination and white supremacy, particularly now during the COVID-19 pandemic, and protest with large number of people in close quarters?
So I think that as far as the protests go, I think that a lot of public health officials have already come out and said that racism is a major public health issue, maybe even more so than COVID. So as far as protesting goes, I think that it's completely valid and necessary right now. Having said that, I know that there are a lot of people who either they're in healthcare or they work with the elderly or something. There's something that prevents them from being able to do that. And I think there are other ways to be supportive of the Black community that we talked about earlier with the first question. And this is perhaps a chance to also reevaluate healthcare right now and the availability of healthcare. I'm not a healthcare expert by any means, but it seems that a group of people should certainly not be able to have access to that and should not be disproportionately affected by a pandemic. And so, yeah, that's mostly what I have to say on that. One other note, actually, if I can be perfectly candid, that something that occurred to me when this pandemic started, as you said, with the racism towards Chinese people, I think in line with my privilege, as a minority, I've never really had to worry about the sort of physical safety of my family, or when physical violence was being enacted upon Asian people because of the fears from coronavirus, you know, I started to get immense amount of anxiety. I was worried about my parents, and that also just made me realize, wow, this is just not even scratching the surface of what a Black person has to go through every day, all the time. It's one thing to sort of understand that in the abstract, and then to have it happen to your own parents or have yourself feel that way about your own family. I think it hit just in a way that it hadn't hit before for me. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Susan. Absolutely. Any other responses? Yeah, Raehann.
So near to where I live here in Texas, we've had two specific incidences. An Asian family was at a Sam's Club, and someone saw them, and it was a family and two little children, ages 2 and 6. I'm sure some of you have heard the story. And the person in the middle of the Sam's Club stabbed this family, including the 2 and the 6-year-old, saying that they were spreading coronavirus, and they decided to stop that spread. Down the road, a Black teen doesn't stop for long enough at a stop sign, and the police, multiple police officers, he drives down the road, parks in his grandmother's driveway, and all these police cars swarm with their guns pointed at him, are all screaming instructions that he must walk towards them. And of course they're terrified that, you know, who's not terrified of walking straight into a gun. And so that situation fortunately didn't result in his death. The children, the Asian family, as far as I last heard, nobody died. They survived. But I think ignorance hurts us all. We all have our own struggles. Our communities may have different struggles sometimes, but ignorance hurts all of us. And
I would add to that intersectionality helps all of us too.
Yes.
That solidarity with another marginalized group does not in any way minimize or deny the struggles of your particular marginalized group.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we have ways that we can help each other. I actually grew up with 2 girls that I call my sisters, that is a Taiwanese family. And just this summer, their mom was staying with us, and we noticed that every for every meal, there was always lots of cooked vegetables and noodles usually. But just from that, I was able to be like, oh, I didn't know I could do so many things with vegetables that, some of which I didn't have any experience with. And just that experience, that interchange, I was able to become healthier in my own life. And I just think that intersectionality, meeting people, expanding your circle, you can't be ignorant when you're constantly in the presence of people who are different from you, you know? And I think that's the best way that we can end some of these biases and see that it's not okay to behave this way and to perpetuate this environment if we actively become part of each other's lives. And I think that's the only solution that I find to be the case.
Beautifully said. I would actually like to ask if you have particular kind of action items, logistic thing, kind of now, today, or tomorrow, things that we can do as the protests are going on and as the pandemic is raging and people are looking for vaccine and Black people are dying left and right and Asian people are being targeted left and right. Like what can we do right now to help each other and to our audience? What can we recommend to our audience?
So for myself, I've been obviously donating to a lot of these organizations. A group of my conservatory trained peers and we formed a small coalition and we offered music lessons in exchange for donations to racial justice organizations. And so we just had our first week of campaigns for that. So I guess
Wow.
you can't donate like money to find other kinds of resources that you have that you can.
That's amazing.
We've also been buying a lot from Black-owned businesses. We've been like we had already been doing it and not really even realizing that we were doing it, but we've been making an extra concerted effort. My favorite ice cream in Baltimore comes from a Black-owned business, so we've been buying like lots of pints of that. Obviously, reading, educating, that has been like top priority. I think I've been reading more and more about Black history and also musical history in these past few weeks than I probably have in a really, really long time. And participating in local government. We just had a primary recently, and it went well here in Baltimore. Brandon Scott is the Democratic nominee, and so yeah, that I think ultimately voting is a very, very important thing that we all need to do.
Tamar, you look like you were reaching for the yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, these are all great things. I could really just like piggyback off of all these great responses. Voting for sure. I know Sam said it early on, and obviously Susan just said it, but like, yeah, getting involved, very much getting involved, looking at the policies that people actually stand for, look for where the money's going and some of your big companies that you support. I found out recently that a company that I was about to, not saying that I won't do this, but that I was going to record my album with, the founder of that organization donated lots and lots of money to Pence and the Trump.
Oof.
So I have to really think about that, get that information like, oh, okay. I also just like recently found out that like Home Depot, for example, I just painted my room last night actually. And, Home Depot gives a lot of money to the campaign, and Lowe's actually is owned by a Black person. So I was like, I'm going to go to Lowe's now.
There you go.
So, those little things, educating yourself, follow the money, because money talks. People don't understand. You can talk to your blue in the face, follow that money, and be active about where you're spending your money. Go to, like Susan was talking about, like get involved in the community. I would say watch as well. There's things, if you read, of course, watch 13th on Netflix, absorb and learn. You can watch even just like Dear White People is a good one, because it does talk about a lot of issues between Black and white people, but also within Black people as far as like colorism and things that are going on. But I know Asians also deal with colorism as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, like look at the similarities between all those things and absorb, because we're all talking about Asian American and African Americans. We're all Americans. Let's learn about each other and fight for each other's presence in this world. It is so important. You know, like we were talking, Raehann was talking about learning culture and food things from the other. I think it's Taiwanese. I believe you said Taiwanese people. Yeah. That is so important. Like I grew up, my dad is Jamaican, 100% Jamaican, but like we had there was a Chinese guy who owned this fish shop. He would get all of his fresh fish, too many SHs, fresh fish yet from, from the seafood market of the street owned by this Chinese guy. And from that, he's absorbed so much cooking techniques
Yeah.
and food things. Like I now cook a lot with like this mushroom soy sauce that I love. So many of my dishes I love to cook. I've done a bunch of cooking things and shows and whatever, but I love to use this mushroom soy sauce that I learned just like listening, absorbing and learning and watching and whatever from my other people in the community. So anyway.
So since we have two people of Jamaican descent, and since we have another fellow Marylander, I have to shout out, it's called Just Jerk in New Carrollton, Maryland, in my neighborhood. I live in a majority African-American neighborhood, and it is absolutely freaking amazing. I had them for the first time a couple months ago, back in March, when I did the hashtag leftovers challenge. Tamar, I'm a really big into home cooking also, and a bunch of food YouTubers did the yes, Helen, go there now. Definitely go. Well, it's probably, oh, you're coming back from New York. Yes, go there now. Oh my God, I'll DM you the info. So a bunch of food YouTubers did the hashtag leftovers challenge a few months ago to support local restaurants, where you basically buy a bunch of stuff and you put the food, you get a bunch of takeout, you put it away, and you cook something really wild with leftovers the next day, and you post it. And it was for, COVID relief for local restaurants. And now I'm, trying to adapt it to Black-owned businesses. So I did a jerk chicken lasagna. That was absolutely amazing, and I'm gonna post on Instagram soon as part of a hashtag. So yeah, I just got two whole things of Jamaican jerk chicken. I asked them for their homemade. I asked them for another container of their homemade sauce, and I just got noodles and like a bunch of mozzarella and put it, and then some scallions cut on the bias, and it was fantastic. So any other concluding thoughts on action items, on looking up to the future, positivity, hope for ways that we can like really make a change going forward? Yeah, Sam.
Going with that theme of like looking towards the future, we really need to be, and I know I've said this throughout this whole thing, but if you're going to do anything at all, find a way to support your Black youth in your community. Like those students, those youth are the future. And you really need to be thinking like,
careful the things you say, children will listen.
You really need to be thinking, are you writing to your local boards, to your local police department, to your local government, to stop excessive policing of youth entirely, especially Black youth? Are you writing to your school boards to request that they defund police presence in schools? Because as I can say as a teacher, there's zero need for that. Are you working to put opportunities into the hands of children, especially queer and trans youth of color and Black children? In Atlanta, there's an amazing company that I've collaborated with, TeachX, founded by Monique Nunnally. They put internship opportunities, tech development, and STEM opportunities into the hands of Black youth in Atlanta to be paired with mentors. So it's stuff like that where it's like, as citizens, even if you don't have children, we have a lot of voice in what happens to our youth, and we need to do a better job of looking out for them, especially at this moment, especially for our Black youth, especially for our queer and trans youth of color.
Anyone else want to offer concluding thoughts, action items, hope for the future, etc.?
I'll just throw in a couple things real quick. You know, there's a lot of organizations out there. There's Color for Change, you know, Black Visions Collective, Campaign Zero, National Bail Fund Network. Broadway Advocacy Coalition is one that recently had a 3-day session this week. It's like a Broadway for Black Lives Matter forum for us to come together and just like talk about actionable things. So I would definitely suggest people go and look up the Broadway Advocacy Coalition. I believe the conversations are available on YouTube right now. And they talk about all of these things that we've been discussing today, and actionable things for like producers and people in the industry, in the music industry, but it can affect everybody outside of the industry as well. So, I mean, big people were in that conversation. There were major casting directors, Tony nominated, Tony winning directors, producers. Audra McDonald was there talking.
Audra, I love her.
Right. LaShawn's, Brian Stokes Mitchell. There was a lot of great big people who were just joining in this conversation to try to make a change. So that's the one I definitely wanted to make sure I threw out there, the Broadway Advocacy Coalition. For
Perfect.
people.
We'll link that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts? I just want to thank each of our panelists personally, as well as from the Wear Yellow Proudly team, for your time today, your enlightening and thoughtful and incredibly powerful and hopefully inspirational and catalyzing remarks today. We are so appreciative of everything you've done for us this evening, everything that you have done, everything that we're sure you will continue to do in the future. I am certain that each of these topics could have been an entire panel. I'm certain that each of these panelists could have been an entire interview. We would love to have you back as collaborators, as artists, as speakers in the future. Now you know me, you know our team, and you know the person who contacted you initially about this panel. So please stay in touch, stay safe. Please give all our best wishes to your families, especially those families, family members who are on the front lines, who are working in healthcare right now. And as I believe I should start signing off all of our panels, in love, solidarity, and Black Lives Matter forever. Thank you.